I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there. I'm completely hopeless at it. I was a really bad actor at school, and I've never been able to master the art of mimicry. But in feeling that fear every single day, and then I suppose they think to themselves, well, maybe that there is a way out.
It began as a quiet afternoon in the palace, until Queen Camilla issued an order that would ignite royal tensions like never before: remove Princess Diana's portrait from its place of honor. To some, it was a bold move toward rewriting history, but to others, it was pure disrespect. Yet before the staff could carry out her command, Prince William arrived, his expression cold and resolute. What happened next not only stopped Camilla in her tracks, but left the entire royal household reeling. This clash was personal, and the fallout was impossible to ignore. Stay tuned. A silent strike against Diana's legacy. It began with silence, sharp, intentional, and deafening. No announcement, no whispered warning, just an empty space on the wall of Clarence House where a familiar portrait once stood. That morning, soft sunlight washed over the East Gallery, but something vital was missing. Royal staff, trained never to react, pretended not to notice. But one aide who passed the corridor daily paused. The portrait of Princess Diana, graceful, luminous, and always subtly guarded by her son's images, was simply gone. Not relocated, not replaced. Gone. Whispers crept in like a chill. Staff speculated quietly. Had it been a routine rotation? A simple change in the curation? But those who'd served long enough knew better. Portraits in royal halls aren't just art. They're declarations of loyalty, power, and remembrance. To remove Diana, of all figures, without warning or context, was no accident. The message was loud, even if no words were spoken. Inside Kensington Palace, preparations were underway for Princess Kate's long-awaited return. Having quietly fought through a brutal battle with cancer, her re-emergence was meant to symbolize strength and renewal.
This, of course, came as a huge shock, and William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately for the sake of our young family.
Yet, behind palace walls, another narrative was unfolding, one steeped in bitterness, not celebration. Queen Camilla, working through back channels, had issued a command: remove Diana's portrait. It wasn't personal, she might claim, but it felt like the final blow in a long, quiet war over legacy and presence. The timing was deliberate, just days before Kate's return to the public eye, when all eyes would inevitably compare her to the one woman whose presence still looms over the monarchy. But this time, that presence had been quietly erased. Word didn't come through official briefings. It slipped through a whisper, a junior staffer overhearing what should never have been said out loud. Diana's portrait, the one that had stood quietly in the hallway like a heartbeat from the past, had been taken down, not misplaced, removed, on direct orders. William didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes shifted. In a palace where silence cuts deeper than words, he knew exactly what this meant. He was already preparing his next move, but what began as a subtle erasure would soon ignite something Clarence House never saw coming. Stay close to the screen. The fire behind the portrait. It wasn't just the missing portrait that sent ripples through royal halls. It was the rage that followed. Not from the public, not from Parliament, but from within the very heart of the monarchy itself. A longtime attendant, eyes rimmed with disbelief, whispered to another, "This isn't about art, it's war." William's reaction was immediate and volcanic. For years he had kept his temper in check, his emotions shielded behind the royal code of silence.
My mother would have known that she had been deceived. She was failed not just by a rogue reporter, but by leaders at the BBC who looked the other way rather than asking the tough questions.
But this was too far. The portrait of his mother, removed without explanation, stripped from its place beside the faces of family, felt like an erasure of the woman who shaped everything he believed in. He called an emergency meeting before the sun had even set. His voice was tight, controlled, but it trembled, with fury, with betrayal. But no one expected what came from Kate, graceful, poised, often described as the calming force beside William's storm. She rose like someone reborn. Gone was the quiet peacemaker. In her place stood a woman no longer willing to be polite. Camilla's quiet maneuver had awakened something fierce. In Kate's eyes burned the promise of resistance. This wasn't just about a frame. It was about a legacy, about a woman she never met but deeply admired. Diana had opened doors through her compassion, broken barriers with her honesty. And now, Kate refused to let that be scrubbed away by silence and protocol. The meeting that followed inside Clarence House was nothing short of electric. The oak-paneled walls, heavy with royal history, seemed to listen as voices rose. William, rarely one to make a scene, stood, fists clenched, trying to find words that would land like thunder without becoming a scandal. His mother's image, once quietly smiling above the fireplace near his study, had been removed like an unwanted memory. And then there was Charlotte, bright, inquisitive, with a stubborn spark that often reminded staff of Diana herself. She had adored that portrait, frequently found staring up at it, asking questions about the grandmother she'd never met, but seemed to feel deeply connected to. One staff member recalled how Charlotte once asked, quite seriously, if Granny D could see her from the picture frame. Now, that frame was gone, and with it, something far more precious vanished, an unspoken connection between generations. Charlotte, still a child, seemed to carry Diana's light, her warmth, her curiosity, even her courage. So when the portrait was taken down, it didn't just remove Diana from the room. It quietly told a little girl that her place in that legacy might not matter either. Behind the scenes, whispers stirred. Staff who had stayed neutral now felt unsettled. Camilla's decisions no longer seemed like quiet updates. They felt like permanent edits. She understood the power of images. What remained and what was removed was never just decor. It was a way to reshape the future by editing the past. But William had seen this before. So, let's rewind. How did the portrait really disappear? And what role did a simple teacup play in it all? Let's find out.
Since the 50s, the 60s, we've made huge strides. Obviously, there's a lot more to be made.
Camilla's quiet command. Camilla didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The power of her words came not from volume, but from the room in which they were spoken. With her back straight and her tone light, she looked toward the wall and said something that chilled the air more than any royal decree. "That one," she murmured, pointing to a portrait with a woman in a soft blue dress. "It no longer suits the room." Her spoon clinked softly against her cup, and the conversation moved on, as though nothing had been said at all. But those who heard her understood. That wasn't just a portrait. It was Diana. Placed deliberately outside William's private study at Clarence House, the image had become a quiet beacon, chosen not for protocol, but for presence. The same portrait Catherine had personally selected during a brief renovation of the space. A symbol of continuity, a subtle reminder of where the family had come from and where it was headed. It balanced the room both in tone and in spirit. But to Camilla, it had always felt like an intrusion, a relic of a legacy that refused to die quietly.
Because surely political correctness is as severe a form of censorship as any.
Insiders say Camilla had long struggled with the shadows that lingered in royal halls. Queen Elizabeth's enduring dignity, Diana's unreachable grace, the adoration the public still poured on William and Catherine, and their children. It wasn't envy, necessarily. It was discomfort. A reminder that no matter how high she had climbed, some stories still sat heavier on the crown than her own. Diana's story, especially, had a gravity that couldn't be softened with time. So the order was passed, disguised as a design choice, cloaked in casual elegance, but calculated all the same. Within hours, the portrait was gone. No fanfare, no discussion, just an empty patch of wall where legacy used to live. Those who walked past it each morning felt it instantly, and so did Catherine. She didn't speak, not at first, but she knew. William, when told, didn't need the details repeated. He could already see the outlines of something bigger forming, something personal. Because in the royal household, where paintings are power and placement is purpose, removing a portrait isn't just about taste. It's about territory. And Camilla had just trespassed. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was tense, like something unspoken pressing down on every polished surface. Whispers in the West Wing. Camilla never issued a public statement. There was no royal decree, no whispered justification, just a quiet decision, and a velvet-covered disappearance. Princess Diana's portrait, once displayed with subtle reverence in a corridor of Clarence House, had vanished overnight. Royal staff, trained to move through palatial routines without reaction, said nothing. But Eleanor, an observant, long-serving aide who walked that hallway every morning, felt it immediately. The space where Diana's portrait once hung, flanked by soft lighting and always within visual distance of her son's framed images, was now an empty wall. No replacement, no label. Just silence. She paused, heart beating a little faster, and pretended to adjust a nearby vase as footsteps passed. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't renovation. Staff had seen curations rotate before, but never like this. This wasn't a relocation. It was an erasure. Within days, quiet murmurs stirred in the staff quarters. No one said Camilla's name, but everyone knew such a move wouldn't have happened without her blessing. In the royal household, art wasn't just decoration, it was diplomacy. To remove Diana, especially without context, was to send a message. And Eleanor, who had witnessed decades of royal tensions, reconciliations, and unspoken rivalries, understood the weight of what had been done. She didn't call the tabloids. She didn't even breathe a word to most of her peers. But on a routine check-in with a trusted former colleague now working at Kensington Palace, Eleanor couldn't hold it in. "They took her down," she said, voice tight. "Who?" "Diana." That one word was all it took. Within hours, the message moved. Not with headlines, but through the palace's inner echo chamber. A discreet, trusted line of loyal aides who still felt bound to the memory of the late princess. By the next morning, William knew.
What has impressed you most about her?
I think just the qualities that are essential for somebody in a leadership role.
It didn't come through an official report. It wasn't presented in a briefing or cushioned with polite explanation. It came from Eleanor's quiet act of defiance, her unwillingness to let history be brushed aside like dust on a mantle. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm into Clarence House demanding answers, but his reaction, when it came, was unmistakable. Those closest to him said his silence was the loudest they'd ever heard. One advisor recalled that he stared at the wall where his mother's portrait once hung for a long time, long enough that even the guards shifted awkwardly. Within days, plans changed. A private commission was quietly approved. A new portrait, one never before seen by the public, would soon take its place in Kensington. And this time, William wouldn't leave the decision to the whims of curators or senior royals. It was no longer just about a painting. It was a stand. a message of his own. And though Camilla may have believed Diana's presence could be quietly removed from view, she had underestimated something far more enduring: the loyalty of those who remembered, and the son who never forgot. But what truly unfolded inside Kensington Palace that night? Was it just a son honoring his mother, or the beginning of a silent rebellion?
Her 20th anniversary year feels like a good time to remember, all the good things about her. And
stay tuned to find out what happened next. William finds out. It started with a folded note, no grand announcement, no dramatic scene. Just Eleanor's clean, steady handwriting was delivered by a trusted aide whose eyes avoided William's as he entered the room. The message was brief, but its weight could be felt in the space between the words. One line, no more, revealed that something of his mother's, something personal, had been removed from its place under Queen Camilla's command. William stared at the paper as if it might change if he read it again. It didn't. What had been taken wasn't simply a decoration or a relic of the past. It was a symbol, a presence, and a memory that should never have been tampered with. His expression didn't shift, not outwardly, but those who'd known him long enough recognized the signal: stillness. And behind that stillness, tension, like the kind just before thunder. This wasn't about protocol. It wasn't about rank or courtiers or quiet backroom decisions made behind thick velvet drapes. This was about legacy. And it struck William in the same part of himself that had once watched his mother, Diana.
The shocking allegations about Princess Diana's death. Authorities now reviewing the new and sensational claim that she was actually murdered by the British government.
Sidelined and reduced by the very same system. The quiet removal of her portrait mirrored what they had done to her spirit all those years ago. Tucked her away, erased her edges, and hoped the public would forget. He didn't say a word as he walked to the fireplace. There, framed moments told the story of his family. George in proud regalia, Louis caught mid-laughter, and Charlotte, smiling in that way only Catherine could make her. William adjusted her frame slightly, more instinct than thought, as if shielding her from something unseen. Then he turned, calm, measured. He summoned his private secretary. No fanfare, just a quiet order. I want every detail. Who approved it, when, and why. He wasn't going to confront Camilla with emotion. He would confront her with the truth, not to win a battle, but to correct a pattern. One that had erased his mother once. It wouldn't happen again. Not while he was watching. The day William walked in, without knocking. Prince William's sudden visit to Clarence House wasn't prompted by a phone call, but a whisper from a trusted source.
you have been brought closer because of the circumstances as well. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You are, uniquely bonded because of what we've been through.
Yeah.
No aides, no security detail, just him and the quiet rage of a son who had seen enough. As he stepped inside through the side entrance, the air shifted. Staff exchanged glances, voices lowered. It was the kind of silence that wrapped itself around everything, heavy with anticipation. Queen Camilla was alone in the white drawing room, flipping through pages of her charity briefs when the footman appeared with a soft knock and a message that made her pause mid-sentence. The Prince of Wales is here. Alone. That hadn't happened in years. Before she could piece together what it meant, he was already at the door. No smile, no formalities, just a sharp, unblinking stare. He didn't sit, didn't remove his coat. He simply asked one question. Why was the portrait removed? Not a portrait, not some decor. He meant the one that mattered. Camilla's response came too quickly, the way rehearsed lines often do when caught off script. It was a minor adjustment, she said carefully. The room was being refreshed, but William didn't move. George and Louis are still there, only hers is gone. Her explanation grew thinner. It's not about her. It was about balance. She's a child, William replied, not a design choice. Camilla tried to steady herself. You know how the press can twist things. It wasn't personal. But William didn't need to raise his voice to strike deep. Then tell me, was it for public image or because of your own discomfort? Because this isn't about portraits. It's about rewriting history. And you don't get to decide who is remembered. Her face froze, stripped of the usual polish. He didn't wait for another excuse. Put it back, he said, turning toward the door. Publicly, or I will, and I won't stop there. But was the silence William left behind a quiet message Camilla couldn't ignore, or a turning point the palace never saw coming?
I commit myself to serve you all, King, country, and Commonwealth. God save the King.
Keep watching to see what unfolded next. The confrontation behind closed doors. She was seated in the white drawing room, sunlight pouring through the tall windows when the footman entered, his tone polite but nervous. His Royal Highness is here, ma'am. Alone. Camilla looked up, puzzled. No advance notice? No private secretary to announce the visit. That wasn't like William. By the time she rose from her chair, he was already in the doorway. He didn't offer a greeting. Didn't sit. His coat was still on, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice cool and controlled, he asked, "Why was my mother's portrait taken down?" The question lingered in the room like smoke. Camilla blinked, thrown off by the directness. She tried to recover, offering something vague, an update to the interior, rotating certain pieces, modernizing the space. But William wasn't having it. His gaze didn't shift. "She's not decor," he said calmly. "She's Diana. She's my mother." It wasn't a plea. It was a reminder, one that needed no royal title to carry weight. The silence between them thickened, the unspoken tension of decades compressing into one unrelenting moment. Then came the line that drew a line through the past and the future. "Restore it, publicly, or I will, and I won't stop there." He didn't stay for tea, didn't wait for a response. He simply turned and left, leaving behind more than a warning. He left behind a choice. Her portrait returns, but this time it speaks. There was no official announcement, no royal press release, no grand unveiling. Yet somehow, everyone knew. On a quiet Thursday soaked in mist, a familiar hush settled over Clarence House. The kind of hush that doesn't come with ceremony, but with significance. Staff who had worked there for decades paused in the hallways. The air felt different, charged. Something was being corrected, not celebrated. Through a discreet side entrance, a royal conservator arrived, accompanied not by assistants or interns, but by 2 senior aides. The type of company that suggests importance, not routine. In their hands, wrapped in protective linen and silence, was the portrait of Diana, Princess of Wales.
HIV does not make people dangerous to know, so you can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it.
Not tucked away in a lesser hallway or a room no one visited. No, this time it was placed in full view, on the grand staircase where foreign leaders, relatives, and future monarchs would pass beneath her gaze. The image hadn't changed. It was still Diana in her calm strength, the same gentle poise, that same light in her eyes that once captivated the world. But now, she was encased in a new frame, gilded and slightly larger, deliberate in its elegance. At the bottom, a brass plaque read, "Diana, Princess of Wales, Mother of Truth, Heart of the People." This wasn't simply restoration. It was a reckoning, a quiet reclaiming. Word moved quickly through the palace walls, even if no one dared say much aloud. According to someone close to the Prince of Wales, the decision came directly from him. There had been, as the source carefully worded it, a private family realignment. But those familiar with royal language understood. Realignment meant William had made a decision, and this time it held.
One of his most candid interviews ever, Britain's Prince William is talking about the impact of losing his mother. He's hoping to help others by sharing his very personal thoughts.
Later that afternoon, when Queen Camilla passed by the staircase, her steps slowed. One attendant noticed she didn't speak. She simply stared, expression unreadable, hands still. Not regretful, not wounded, just still. She understood. That portrait wasn't just back. It now stood like a statement carved in gold. Diana's presence had never been erased, only temporarily misplaced. At Kensington, William explained its return to his children with careful words. Diana's youngest granddaughter listened, curled up beside her father on the sofa. "She's back where she belongs," William said gently. "Not for the world to see, but for us to remember." His daughter asked why it had ever been taken down. William paused. "Some people forget what matters," he said, "but sometimes love reminds them." In the tabloids, speculation swirled, side-by-side photos, questions with no answers, but Clarence House remained silent. They didn't need to speak. The frame said everything. Diana's image now hung not just on a wall, but in defiance of silence, in memory, in blood. Her place had never truly left. Now it had simply returned, stronger and impossible to ignore. The legacy. William refused to let fade. It didn't start with a speech or a scandal. It started in silence, just like it had years ago when a young boy stood beneath palace ceilings and watched his mother's image quietly disappear from the walls that once celebrated her. That silence never left him. And now, as a man and future king, Prince William decided it would speak no longer. This wasn't about one frame or a forgotten photo. It was about what that absence meant. In the grand tradition of the monarchy, power is often shown through presence. Who is seen, who is remembered, and who is quietly moved aside. Diana had once been everywhere. Her smile in the halls, her warmth in the press, her name on the lips of a nation. But in time, that presence was softened, removed under the name of progress. Camilla's rise came with subtle shifts. One less portrait here, fewer mentions there. It was quiet, strategic, and intentional, but William had been watching. What others called decorum, he remembered as pain. He knew what erasure looked like dressed in tradition. So when he sensed that same cold routine tiptoeing back into Clarence House, he didn't raise his voice. He raised his mother. The portrait returned larger, bolder, and now positioned where it couldn't be ignored. Not tucked in a corner, but on a wall that mattered. Underneath, a new inscription didn't just honor Diana, it defended her. Diana, Princess of Wales, beloved, brave, unforgotten. Camilla never publicly addressed its return, but those within the palace noted how her stride slowed near the staircase, her glance lingering a moment too long. It was enough. She knew. For William, this was never about revenge. It was about memory, about protecting not just his past, but the truth his children would grow up believing. So what do you think truly pushed Prince William to bring back Diana's portrait? Grief, loyalty, or quiet resistance? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.